This is Geek Gab with your host, Dornall, and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back, Geek Gab, for, oh gosh, it's got to be August or something. Geek Gab for Monday, August 12th, 2024. And I'm used to having my computer right here, like right by me, so I can just look at the calendar and know what time it is. But I do not have my computer today. My computer is gone. It is, and you'll remember me talking about it when I first got it because it's big. It had that 27-inch screen. It had a 3 terabyte Fusion drive and was a 5K screen, and I loved it so much, and it is gone. It is dead. Had an Apple Care plan on it, so I had to take it into the Apple Care store because I was getting kernel panics and stuff, and I spent 48 hours backing everything up off the hard drives because I ran the self-test, and it turns out that the hard drive came back with the smart status of failing.
Oh no.
Fortunately, it was able to back up absolutely everything on the hard drive except the files that were a backup on my phone, which my phone still works, so I didn't have to care. But I took it into the Apple store, and they said, well, this is a vintage computer. Apparently, anything you bought 6 years ago is now vintage.
6 years ago.
6 years ago,
And it's
vintage.
already, yeah, okay, sure, whatever.
But I have Apple Care on it because I pay my little monthly fee just in case things break down that they have to replace it. Because I can't afford to buy a new computer, but I can afford a small monthly fee to get things replaced. So I said, that's fine. And the other thing the guy said was, I've never seen a vintage computer with Apple Care on it.
Huh.
And I thought, well, that's because you've never seen someone who, you know, pays smart about paying his fees every month. So he said, we may have a trouble getting replacement parts. And I kind of shrugged. I said, well, I guess we'll see. So they took the computer and they did all their tests and came back that both drives in the computer are failing. And they absolutely cannot find replacement parts to put in the computer.
Uh, that sounds like crap to me.
So they're giving me a new computer.
That's a little better. Not a vintage one.
Not a vintage one. Brand new computer, free of charge.
Not bad.
No
That's
upgrade price,
that's not the worst news.
no shipping, no handling, just mailing out a new computer to my house. So,
And now you're stuck geek gabbing on your phone.
yes, I am. The thing is, I'm not going to complain about a new, faster computer. One thing I am kind of sad about is that at the time I bought a top of the line Mac. So they're sending me a top of the line iMac, which is what I bought. But the top of the line iMac they have now is not as good as the top of the line iMac I had then. It's only a 24-inch screen, not a 27-inch screen. It's only a 2 terabyte internal, not a 3 terabyte internal. It only has 24 gigs of RAM instead of 64 gigs of RAM.
Good grief.
Yeah, I paid
I
to
did
put
64 gigs of RAM. Were you editing film in your spare time and you didn't tell me?
No, I regularly had browsers with like 600 tabs open.
100.
100, yeah.
Huh. Okay.
So I really was pushing the limits of my machine. uh, all the time. Uh, so it was it's kind of sad that it wasn't, it isn't as robust as the new machine. On the other hand, it's several generations of processor newer. My computer was in Intel, and this is the new uh, Mac processors, the new um, M3 processors, which are phenomenally fast. So I'm hoping it'll be, it sounds like it's an incredible machine, and looking forward to it. I'm just kind of,
Sounds like a big upgrade.
yes. And they're not charging me for it, which is a hell of a deal.
Well, they have to. I mean, they have to eat that as soon as they realize they can't get you the parts that they owed you for the plan that you paid. That was
Yeah.
it. They tied their hands.
So I don't know if we should move on, but I'm just saying, hey, you know, under AppleCare warranty, they're paying for an entire new computer. So I've heard horror stories about Apple from other people, but they did right by me.
Well, good. Yeah. We can move on. You so without your computer, it sounds like you've been out to the movies lately.
Yeah, actually, when I took my computer into the Apple store, there's a movie theater right there in the same, because they always put Apple stores in like mall-ish areas, not malls, but like those open area shopping places with roads running through them that have replaced malls. I don't even know what you call those. Urban
Yeah. What do you call
development
them now?
zones. Uh,
It's
like,
not quite an open air mall.
yeah. So, but they have a movie theater in that area. And I went into the movie theater, uh, and sadly enough, tragedy of tragedies, Borderlands hadn't opened yet.
Oh,
So I wasn't able to see Borderlands. Have you heard about Borderlands?
I I saw the trailer. Do I need to hear more?
It apparently has been grossing $5 million so far on a $110 million budget,
Huh.
and has started off with a 0% Rotten Tomatoes score, that has improved now to, I believe, 10%. Uh, it is widely reviled by people who are not a fan of the video games, and widely reviled by people who are fans of the video game.
That's how it is sometimes.
I have not seen it, so I cannot review it, but uh, everybody seems to dislike it intensely.
Well, of course. The
Uh,
casting alone was completely absurd.
yeah, you have a
Never
bunch of
mind.
like you have a bunch
Never
of
mind it. If what's it called? The writing in the game is so bad, the movie's got to be 10 times worse.
you have a bunch of 50-year-old people playing 20 and 30-year-old characters. It's
Oh, that's absurd.
so. Anyways, that hadn't opened yet, so I didn't have a chance to go and enjoy that cinematic ball of wonder. Uh, I went and saw A Quiet Place Day Zero. Um, which uh, I don't feel like stretching out the review. It didn't
Yeah,
suck. It wasn't bad. It's in the top 10 grossing films of the year now. So it's kind of a surprise hit because not a lot of people were excited about it. it was good. It was not great. Uh, I wouldn't rush out to the theaters to see it, but it wasn't a bad movie. Um, it had tense moments. Um,
Now this is a prequel, but it wasn't made by the same people who did A Quiet Place.
it was the story was by uh was by what's his name from The Office,
Okay, John Krasinski.
John Krasinski. So he was involved in it, but I don't think he was as involved with this as he was with the original. So I think he has some rights in the series, and he's involved in the whole series. But obviously, he was most involved with the first one.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, it was tense. They're the same monsters that they've always been, and it's interesting to see, everyday life get interrupted by them, and people first reacting to them, and instead of like this empty world they're rampaging around in, they start in Manhattan, and people are trying to evacuate the city, and they're all landing and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. There are much worse films out there. It's just not a. It doesn't quite land as hard as it should. Um, but it's still an okay movie. I can't give it an enthusiastic recommendation, but it's not a bad movie. The performances are all good. Um, the script is decent, and it's just all right. It's not great. I don't know. There's not much else I can say. They're the Quiet Place monsters. They're alien beings that can't see but can hear really sharply. They react to sound. When they hear sound, they come and attack you, and they eat you or kill you or whatever. And that's it.
Yay. Yeah, that doesn't sound like sounds like it. I know I say that a lot, but you the label shows what's inside the tin.
Yeah.
It is what it says on the tin. Oh,
Um,
well, I guess
I
I'm kind of glad that you kind of sort of enjoyed it.
yeah. I mean, I wasn't like I was bored at a few points. It a little bit dragged on, but not super bored. And it uh it was very short. The periods of boredom, and it moved on. It does drag a little in places. Um, Amazon has a TV series called Carnival Row, and Carnival Row is set in a uh, gaslight period alternate history that sort of resembles Victorian England. Um, and then across the ocean is another country that sort of resembles Germany slash Russia, not meshed together. And then there's another land close by called Tirnanok, where a bunch of fairy races come from. There are full-size human called Picts who have fairy wings and can fly. There are fauns who again are basically the size of human, who have horns on their head and goat legs. And then there are other non-human races, including some small ones. Certain kinds of magic are real. There are things called haruspecs who can use read the future using the entrails of creatures and things like that. So the first season of Carnival Row debuted several years ago, and the second season debuted a year or two ago, and I just finished watching it yesterday. The first season was all right. It dealt with a series of murders around the city. It has Cara Delevingne in it, and Orlando Bloom. Orlando Bloom plays a half Pix whose wings have been cut off, but he passes for human, and he is a copper or policeman in the police force of the Burge, which is the name for this Victorian kingdom. There was a war being fought in Tirnanok between the Pact, who is the Russian Germans, and the Burge. And the Pact won, and all of the pixies and fae and stuff ended up as second-class citizens in the Burge, and they live in this place called Carnival Row. So that's where the series comes from. And it's all about, racism and stuff, and how the fae, which they call the Critch for some reason, how all these fairy races are second-class citizens in this pseudo-Victorian era. The first series, the first season was fun. It was a little bit imaginative. They're chasing down this creature that's committing a bunch of, or this being who's committing a bunch of horrible serial murders. And there's tension between the humans and the Critch. And a lot of humans hate the Critch, a lot of Critch hate the humans. There's underworld intrigue. There's an organization of thieves called the Black Raven, and there's a romance between Cara Delevingne, who's a full Pix, and Orlando Bloom, who's a human, that they both have to kind of keep secret from both sides, and it's really interesting. This second season just kind of goes sideways. The writing gets really bad. Characters start acting in random ways for the purposes of drumming up drama. They change at different points in the season for no real reason. They suddenly begin acting in exactly the opposite manner that they normally do for no good reason, and then flip-flop back and forth several times. And this romance that they've been building for the first and second season suddenly breaks up at the end, so they can have a lesbian wedding between Cara Delevingne's character and her best friend as the denouement for that relationship, because she breaks up with Orlando Bloom. And Orlando Bloom, who turns out is the bastard son of the late prime minister of the Burge, gets elected as the first half fairy prime minister because of some things he does, but he tells them, no, I'm not going to be prime minister because you're all a bunch of racists, and we're supposed to believe that's heroic. Sorry, I'm spoiling the whole series for you. It's awful. Don't watch it.
I appreciate that.
And the only really decent thing about it is that they really portray a communist revolution with the brutality that it deserves. But it just waffles off into the main female character, which is Cara Delevingne, gets a bunch of people telling her how wonderful and awesome she is, and kind of, hero worshiping her, despite the fact that she's really an awful person. And people directly tell her how awful she is. like the friend of hers who she ends up, having a lesbian wedding with, deliberately tells her, look, you don't really love me at one point. You always fly off uh, and get involved in one cause after another. You always abandon me because you're always seeking after something to give your life meaning. And then, and you're going to do it soon. And the very next episode she just abandons her friend and isn't there for her friend when her friend gets attacked by a monster, which she saw coming in a vision. Because her friend is a Haruspex and has this vision. So her friend predicts, hey, this big evil monster is going to come try to kill me, and you're going to fly off and abandon me. And the main character, Cara Delevingne's character, flies off and abandons her. And yet they get married at the end, even though she's awful person. And everybody loves her. She's like the true leader of the revolution and stuff.
This is the worst thing I've ever
heard. She wasn't this bad in the first season. They just made her a horrible person this season. Just the worst person ever. She's really strident. She lectures everybody. She's really self-righteous and arrogant. And it made her a completely unsympathetic character. So it used to have some stuff going for it in the first season. They completely just dropped everything in the second season. And it also had at least 2 or 3 big lectures by female characters about how hard it is to be a woman, just like She-Hulk did. About how men lecture them and how they have expectations on them, how tired they are of living up to expectations and stuff. And I'm like, you live in Victorian England. And across the sea is Russia, Prussia, and I'm saying those two differently. I'm not getting Prussia and Russia mixed up. Do you know how high the expectations were on men in Prussia? The regimented militaristic society, what the demands were on men in Prussia? Do you know what the demands were on men in Victorian society? It's insane to hear this much victimization about how, they're the only ones with expectations being pushed on them, and how, nobody else has expectations on them and stuff. So yeah,
but it's not about that time period, is it? The writers don't even understand the time period. It's always about the current year.
Yes. So it just got drearified. It just got they ruined a series that had a lot going for it. But they did have the guts to show that what this communist revolution was supposedly about, is a Fey woman and her human lover, and they were broken apart, and she was thrown in jail for it because it's forbidden in all these societies for Fey and humans to consort. And she wrote this book in jail about how she was oppressed and stuff. And she was. I'm not saying that's false. She was genuinely, beaten and stuff in jail. And so she came out of it, and in order to get Fey and humans to accept each other and to be equal, she tore down society and had all the aristocrats murdered and established this dictatorship They didn't say dictatorship of the proletariat, but that's what it was. This highly regimented society where everyone is watched all the time with secret police. And, uh, kudos to them for that being what they did, where someone trying to free society like that and radically restructure society implemented this dictatorial system. And they even have a discussion of people talking about how change in the Berg after they prevent this new dawn from having a uh, communist revolution. And nobody ever says the word communist. Nobody ever says the word socialist. They never discuss socialism. It just is this revolution, the new dawn revolution. How they prevent this revolution in the Berg. After they do that, they talk about how change is coming. It's more slowly, but you know, comes without violence, comes without all these negative side effects. So it is courageous uh, of the writers. They at least have the understanding of history to put that in there. So they're not 100% doctrinaire on those issues. So I don't want to give the impression that they are blindly following some kind of political agenda, because they're not.
Well, it's not so important because it's not a good show.
Nope. It really is. It really is unfortunate, because the first season was actually pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
So
that's a shame.
it did. Um, there are other works of art seem to have fallen into that same trap of having female characters that are just insufferable, um, whose primary quality seems to be that they are just boundlessly praised by everyone around them, despite being insufferable and really not being very good at what they do. Um, so, oh yeah, one major thing is the Harris Specs bit. It's really, really dark, dark magic, like absolutely black magic that corrupts the soul. But and they play up this bit throughout the entire season about how her friend who's diving into it is choosing to embrace it, is damning her soul. But in the end, she just goes off back to Tiernanak, and nothing ever happens to her. She gets married, and we never see any consequences for that. That's just kind of dropped. So they set this up as being this big dramatic thing with dramatic stakes, but never follow up on that. Don't do that. If you're a writer, don't do that. Uh, it's uh, it's bad to set something up as being a huge theme and then just to have it disappear and not.
You gotta pay it off. You set it up, you gotta pay it off.
Yeah. So
Well, I I'm glad to hear it, and also sad to hear that you bothered watching it. Um, I want to talk gaming.
okay.
You have you been enjoying? Have you paid attention at all to the RPG discussion on Twitter X and in the blogosphere?
I uh I caught the side of the um well, see, I got swamped by the absolute insanity that is the Trench Crusade fan base. Those guys are nuts. Uh, and uh, that even after I stopped replying, those people kept inundating my replies for like days. Uh, and I don't even know if I want to explain that. Basically, when Warhammer went kind of woke with the Femme Custodes thing, overturning like all of their lore since the beginning, a bunch of Warhammer fans discovered a new game called Trench Crusade, which had some really fantastic art and is set in an alternate Earth where an alternate World War One where humans are fighting actual literal demons from hell, um, who and they're engaged in trench warfare against them.
Okay, cool.
So they're like, "Oh, this is awesome." And they thought, okay, so on one side we have literal demons from hell, on the other side we have tanks and machine guns and artillery. So those are the good guys. And the moderator of the Discord turns out to have been a real lunatic from a hardcore left-wing miniatures magazine who just started banning a bunch of people, not for anything they did on the Discord, but just because they didn't like them. Basically because, they were right-wing on Twitter.
That's normal, sane uh, human behavior. Yeah.
And when people complained to the maker of the game, so they got a lot of heat on. There was a lot of discussion about the game on Twitter because people liked the artwork, because the artwork was legitimately awesome, and people really liked the game. We got a lot of discussion on Twitter. They banned. Then they started all these bannings. People complained to the guys making the game. The guys making the game says, we 100% unequivocally support whatever our mods are doing. They didn't really look at it. The mods were lying to them. And so everybody dropped the game and it went back to being pretty obscure. So they had a chance to grab a big, huge new audience, and they basically, muffed it. They messed it up. So I asked the question because I was kind of curious. I remembered this, and I said, "Hey, anybody remember that game that was about all the demons and uh, World War One that screwed this up with all the players and then disappeared? Whatever happened with that anyway?" Because I know a lot of guys who follow me on Twitter would know about that. Well, apparently, absolute lunatics got a hold of that and retweeted it because, um, it got like 5,300, 5,600 likes, and threads I broke off from it got like 5,300, 5,600 likes. And they just kept coming. And out of all of these hundreds of replies, literally one person talked about what they liked about the game, and every other person talked about how much they loathed and hated and despised and wanted to destroy all the people they kicked out of the game, and how glad they were they kicked all the people out of the game, and how good it was they kicked other people out of the game, and they called them chuds and Nazis and things like that, and said they got rid of all the trad calf larpers, and how stupid it was that people thought there were any good guys in this setting, because one person literally said, "I don't understand how you can see a setting with demons and the church," he meant the Catholic Church, "and think that there would be any good guys."
Yeah. I hate
Uh,
gamers.
and I was like, what? Uh, so that went on for several days. And finally, I just, muted the threads because I was like, okay, it's long past the point where I'm having any interesting feedback from this, because I was getting some interesting, feedback from it for a little bit. Got some interesting, people posting interesting things, but after about a day that stopped, so I just muted them. They might still be going for all I know. I mean, probably not, but they might be. So I just muted it and moved on. And so, as far as recent gaming discussions, so this is my impression of the current fan base of Trench Crusade is that it's filled with a bunch of people who don't love the game, who don't know anything about the game. They just hate that religious people and or right-wing people thought it was cool and wanted to play the game, and they were glad that they ran them off. They also hate Christianity. They also hate um, religion in general. And then I learned some things about the game that were really, kind of gross. And I'm like, oh, well, it sounds like it wasn't a game for me anyway. Not that I play miniatures games. I don't play Warhammer, things like that. I was just kind of curious what had happened with it.
Well,
So,
we'll pray for them to unfix their heads from their rears.
the the one thing I did catch, at least part of, was the mythic underworld discussion, which was kind of interesting. I don't know if you caught that.
Oh, not in relation to this awful game.
No. Mythic Underworld. Moving on from this game,
Yeah.
there
And
was
there's been lots of great discussion on Twitter and in the in the blogs. Naturally, mostly amongst the BroSR. There was some great discussion of dungeons representing the mythic underworld. What
yes.
did you see about that?
Um, Basically, that the one post I saw that was really great was quoting something from the OSE manual, where they were talking about dungeons being the mythic underworld, where it represented a place where monsters lived that proceeded according to dream logic, where you didn't have to dream up. Where the practical upshot was that you didn't have to dream up exact ecological sense for your mythic underworld. So I want to relate that to, for example, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 or Fallout New Vegas. One of the things people liked about Fallout New Vegas over Fallout 3 is that the people in New Vegas bothered to put in things like fields of crops and water sources, and like sewage and things, so that it seemed more like a real and authentic world. Because it's a um, science fictional world, it made the world feel more real and more authentic, um, which is a good thing, and it's a real strength Fallout New Vegas had over Fallout 3. But when you're building a dungeon in D&D, it isn't necessary to put your dungeons together. This is the argument for Mythic Underworlds, is that it isn't necessary to put your dungeons together the same way Obsidian put Fallout New Vegas together. You don't have to create an ecology for the dungeon. You don't have to worry about, okay, well, here's the plants, here's the herbivores that eat the plants, here's the omnivores that eat the herbivores and the plants, and here's the apex predators who eat the omnivores and herbivores, and then you need to make sure that the number of apex predators relative to the number of omnivores and herbivores and plants are in proper percentage, because you need to have a very small number of apex predators. And if you have an intelligent species, you have to make sure there's only so many of them, so that they don't overhunt the amount of game in the area. You absolutely don't need to do that, because this is the mythic underworld, and it is a place where legends happen and where things proceed according to, dream logic. And there are monsters here that can't necessarily be supported in ways that are in ways that would be possible in the natural world, and that's okay. You
And
don't need
it's
you
it's just not important.
Yeah.
Nobody stops to ask where the monster does his business. Nobody. I mean, sometimes if you encounter a dragon in a tight corridor, they wonder where the heck that dragon got to, but nobody cares. Everybody intuitively understands, first of all, that you're playing a game, and second of all, that this is a dangerous place full of mystical evils and threats. Even if even if the concept of the mythic underworld isn't explained or explicitly called out, or people understand what it means to go on an adventure in a game like Dungeons and Dragons. We understand what it means to go into the dungeon. It's not just a literal place that we go to.
I mean, if you want to, if you really feel the need, saying, okay, um, this is a dungeon that's been manufactured by, Zizag the wizard, and he has runes that attract monsters to this dungeon that keep them sustained to where they don't have to eat, they just exist. Okay, that's all you need, these little magical ruins. I mean, you don't have to do that, but if you wanted to, that's all you need. Or that, they were brought here from via portals. Um,
The
or that
that's the Rifts method from Palladium.
or that there are or that there is that these monsters represent the forces of chaos. And this is, I think, OD&D oriented. They represent the forces of chaos, which has infested this place. Um, and, chaos ensures that monsters appear here every so often. I mean, you don't have to, even with the mythic underworld, there are things you can say to explain it, but it boils down to it's literally part of the magic of this world. Um, and and that's all right. The explanations are not naturalistic, and they don't have to be naturalistic.
No, not at all. Like I said, it actually isn't the important part. It's not relevant to the purpose or the point. Like it just doesn't serve the needs of the players or the game or the setting or anything.
And you can even make that, kind of interesting. You can say, okay, this part of the dungeon is having creatures appear in it that are um, due to chaos magic, so it's aligned to chaos, and chaos monsters are appearing here. But this part of the dungeon is having evil creatures appear in it, so that's having creatures aligned to evil appear, and they're in conflict. And so that's something interesting you can do with those concepts. If you take that step and say, okay, this is magic, but what kind of magic is it? If you're interesting, if you're willing, that can have consequences in the dungeon, and you can think those out. But don't be bound by, or you can say, well, these monsters are coming up from an even deeper level that leads to some extra-dimensional plane where all these beings are coming from, and they're just leaking through. Or these dimensional rifts. Can they be dispelled? Can they be? Because if part of the player's goal is to civilize a castle and there's a dungeon underneath the castle, part of their goals can be to occupy a dungeon level by level and quote unquote clear it out. And that should be possible by returning order, just like it's possible to clear out a hex. It should be possible to clear out a dungeon by occupying it with a force and then making it part of the natural, normal world again. So it's no longer part of the mythic underworld. And if you explain, if there is an explanation for where these things come from, then players can strategize around it. If they can discover the source of what is unnatural about this place, then players can strategize on how to reconquer it if such a thing is possible. And if at its heart it's like, okay, well, there's a cursed temple with this blasted unholy relic at its heart, and in order to stop all these evil things from happening, you have to destroy the relic. And they did this in and I guess maybe this will completely disprove my case, and people will say, "Bah, how dare you mention a video game?" But like the original Diablo game had it where, powerful monsters or a horrific altar or some artifact was causing an area to be unclean and monsters would come in. But if you could find that and destroy that or whatever, the area would be clean and monsters would no longer be generated in that area. The evil could be cleansed. You could have a cleric come in and consecrate a temple that had been defiled, consecrate it to the good gods again. I was just seeing on Twitter today an entire thread about when Christians were being persecuted by the Romans, they literally built cities underground that could hold 20,000 people. And they had football field sized or basketball court sized churches carved from stone with temples in there. And these are real. They existed in the real world. And you could have places like that could be made holy again. So part of an adventurer's job in delving into these dungeons could be to push back, not just push back the wilderness and a hex to make their domain, but push back the mythic underworld and return sanity to this area. And that's so a lot of people sneer at the notion of quote unquote clearing out a dungeon, but that's
What does
got
that
to
really mean? Yeah, what does that really mean? they're thinking of it in terms of like playing Diablo and just clicking on the monsters till they're all gone, and then what? They're
Yeah,
not thinking. They're not thinking of returning civilization to ruins. They're
right.
not. They're not thinking of. Well, sometimes they are an evil presence. Maybe there's a big bad lich at the bottom of the dungeon that needs to be cleaned out. Right? It's not only that. It's restoring that. Restoring that all that stuff, all that area to the civilized world.
Yeah. I mean, that's a powerful thing. That is literally some of the most powerful stories uh, in canon and history are of a formerly great city that was once shining and pure that's been taken over by evil. The Two Towers, a book with J.R.R. Tolkien, um, they used to have a city that was on the edge of Mordor that had been held by good and noble and decent people that was built to watch over Mordor that became a stronghold of evil when good men were driven from it and was now a fortress of evil. So, in a role playing game where, and I'm not saying a Lord of the Rings role playing game, but a role playing game that's Dungeons and Dragons with a similar setup, you can actually have adventurers go who are high level and had armies could go and lay siege to that city and drive the evil orc armies from the city and go in and try and cleanse the city of evil if that's what the players wanted to do. Those are literal options you could have of pushing evil back, of bringing civilization to the wilderness, bringing civilization to ruins of and I guess it was clearer in OD&D where it was law versus chaos because um, law was civilization, it was cities, it was mankind, it was uh, the rule of order and rationality, and chaos was magic and fell things and darkness and the mythic underworld. All of that was chaos. And so thematically, the game was set up of law versus chaos. Um, so yeah, that definitely is something that the mythic underworld lends itself to properly understood. It's not that dungeons are these places to be raided for just these places. They're not only these places to be raided for treasure. They're these places that you go into to bring back the light of civilization to um, drive out these fell forces of corrupting uh, uh, magic from.
Yeah, and it's a recurring theme even outside the dungeon, where higher level characters are are meant to seek out the wilderness and tame it. Right? You're
Yeah,
supposed to bring that to heal and make it a place for mankind to flourish.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Uh,
do agree. I do agree with the mythic underworld thing, but I think that even though you don't need a naturalist ecology in the dungeon, having a reason for it in a specific dungeon that players can identify and combat isn't a bad thing.
sort of
Uh,
like the lich example.
yeah,
There's a lich at the bottom of the dungeon, or it's a dragon's lair or something, or some. If nothing else, then a theme. Would you
a
say?
theme. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's fair. That's fair. On the other hand, you could just roll with the random tables and let the game determine the theme, which
yeah.
in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is actually pretty good.
Yeah. See what the random tables roll up and let that determine your theme. You don't have to come up with
Yeah,
it yourself.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Good games do that kind of heavy lifting for you and let you just enjoy hanging out with your friends, and attempting to kill them. So, uh,
The other thing,
the other thing. So
Braunstein.
I really wanted to talk about Braunsteins today, and we've taken up the whole episode, but that's okay. We're just gonna have to stay late. Um, we
Oh,
have
we're not
been
even to an hour yet.
we have been flogging the Braunstein type of game in Broasar for the past few months, and this past week, while I was at home dealing with painters tearing apart the house and painting everything up, I had the opportunity to play in a couple of these Braunsteins, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about them because I think the results were really cool. The first one was B-Dubs 1776. That's his Twitter handle. He put out a call for players to play antagonists or adversaries in his ongoing uh, axe game called Dubzaron. Now, since I had some free time queued up, I jumped in, and I was not disappointed in uh, the the results. If you want to know more about this, I'm going to put a link on the screen for you. You can read his report here. Uh, there's a couple things going on in this Braunstein. So when we all got together, he gave me a character that was the mayor of a city where all the player characters were going to be operating out of. And and he decided that he would use a module scenario, if you can believe it, as a setup for this Battle Braunstein. So all the players are in a city, and B-Dubs picked up a screenshot of a new module called the Shucked Oyster. Have you heard about this?
I have.
Yeah, the guys from Black Lodge Games decided to write a uh, module for what's the name of this new game, Shadow Dark, called the Shucked Oyster. It's supposed to be a brothel and a den of sin and whatnot for a sort of darker themed dungeon crawling sort of game. But it's written as a series of characters who all have different likes and interests and things, but it also has a fun gimmick, which is the the Shucked Oyster building just keeps burning down. It always gets burned to the ground. But that's all we knew about the module because it's still in Kickstarter and it hasn't come out yet. So B-Dubs decides he's gonna try to flex his skills as a game master, and he says that's okay. I can run a whole Brattle Braunstein off of the scenario in the screenshot. Right, I've got everything I need to run a Battle Braunstein. So go back to the start of the game. I'm given a mid-level character with some armies, and I'm controlling the city. And he says, okay, this is the scenario. All the players are at the Shucked Oyster. It burns down. And one of the other antagonists, played by another player, that'd be Bob Stevens, uh, he plays Svetlana, the Madame of the Oyster, fingers the player characters as the culprits. It's them. They did it. Then, and we're all playing over Discord, so he's got a few different voice channels created. So I'm in my own voice channel while he handles the immediate aftermath of the fire. And after a few minutes, it's a free for all game. So we've got something like 6 player characters running over the city, And my character, the Mayor Lambert, is in control of the city, and I'm trying to track down the other player characters to try and figure out A, who might have burned down the Shucked Oyster. B, apparently the Shucked Oyster, the fire consumed one of my barracks where my soldiers are being held. And C, naturally, the first thing the player characters did was resist arrest by the guards and kill some of my guards. So at the very beginning of the scenario, and my hat's off to B-Dubs for putting this together this way. The beginning of the scenario, and my hat's off to the Black Lodge Games guys for having such a compelling idea. The thing burning down. So there's the setup. The player characters are in hot water. One of them, or one of us, burned down the Shucked Oyster. The ref actually randomly determined who did it and sent them a private message saying, by the way, you are the one who burned down the Shucked Oyster. You need to come up with a good reason why. And then the characters just went around town, and we used Discord voice channels with different channels representing different locations in the city to talk to each other and move around town. And B-Dubs was hopping from channel to channel, just checking in with the different groups of people. Either he's spreading information such as, hey, word gets around town, the mayor's looking for you, that sort of thing. And also handling any ref stuff he needs to do. Oh, is there a fight? Yeah, let's handle this fight. Running through the rules. There weren't a lot of fights, but so as far as my part in it, I was a little too passive at the beginning. I mistakenly thought that one of the other players would come and speak to me because the two characters had a previous history. And that was the eventual winner of the Braunstein, Einar the Barbarian, played by Brigadine. We talked to Brigadine before, maybe.
Yes.
So anyway, I started off a little passive, hoping to see what develops and watch what the players do. That turned out to be a mistake, of course. But eventually, I ended up interacting with a cleric who seemed suspicious, and there was an elf who always seemed suspicious, and some of the other characters. I was able to recover my lieutenant, who was not killed in the scuffle. A long story short, things came out. Like, it was obvious that my soldiers were charmed. Okay, and we all had figured out that it was probably Svetlana the Madame who had charmed them. But at the same time, I was trying to get the players to work against each other, and so that I can figure out who maybe is hiding something, who might be going off on his own. And a horrible realization came upon me near the end of the scenario as we all sort of reconverged on the ruins of the Shucked Oyster to confront Svetlana and her consort, Jalan, is that all the player characters were working together against... Well, I don't know. I couldn't tell who they were working against or for, but they certainly weren't telling me the truth. And it was then that I realized that I was in way over my head in more ways than one. I was in way over my head because I had no idea what was going on. I had strong suspicions about two of the characters, but my character was also in under his head because the real mystery had nothing to do with who blew up the Shucked Oyster. The Madame's consort was a vampire and a recurring villain in the game. Once again, strike against me, who I had no idea who this character was, and strike against my character, because at the very end, right before the final showdown, it became evident that most, if not all, of the player characters had been charmed.
Oh,
It wasn't just the madam charming my soldiers. By the end of the night, I realized that everybody else had been charmed, and I had no idea what was actually happening. So we did have a fun sort of convergence, and that's the big word, the big watchword for Braunstein is eventually there's going to be a convergence. People are going to spread out. They're going to talk. They're going to, plans are going to start coming together and coming to fruition, and different players are going to try to do different things. And then sort of after a couple of hours, those plans and plots and things converge, and there's a conflict, there's a fight, there's a battle, there's, something happens. And so we converged on the ruins of the Shucked Oyster, where the madam and her assassin, she had some assassin wenches with her, were fighting a couple of the player characters. And it was at this point I realized that all the other characters were behaving very strangely. And that the best I could hope for was to contain this fight to the ruins of the Shucked Oyster. I ended up arresting the two characters that I had suspicions on, that I was suspicious of being guilty, and told everybody else involved in the game, get the hell out of town. Just leave. Because at that point, I realized that I had been outmatched and my character had been outmatched, and at that point, it was just time to get everybody out. And at that point, the ref took over, B-Dubs took back over, and he did a really nice summary of what happened, plus there is an epilogue, right? We like to call it the icing on the cake, where the vampire in question was working for an evil god, and some of the other characters, or Einar the barbarian was also working for that evil god, and so they were able to get away with some great treasure in the basement of the Shucked Oyster. So it wrapped up really nicely with a little story time at the end. It was really satisfying for me. I'd like to thank B-Dubs for inviting me and the Dubzaron crew. Great players, really elite guys. It was a lot of fun, and it was really well done. And I've got a link up on the video if you're on YouTube, bdubsanddragons.blogspot.com. He's got a great rundown of what he did, what he's doing, and you can get his perspective and his details there. Awesome. I highly recommend it. But that's what you want out of a Braunstein. You've got a great setup. You throw everybody in a room. Everybody's got slightly different knowledge and motivations, and you just let them have at it. And as the ref, you just watch out for things to happen. Anything you want to know? Any questions, Warpig?
so the vampire is the one who was charming everybody?
Yes, there was in the initial encounter, the madame charmed my guards when she accused the player characters. And that's what initiated the combat, because the guards weren't taking no for an answer. If they weren't charmed, they'd be like, okay, yeah, whatever, lady. But when the scenario started and player characters split up and started going around town doing things, the character, or the player who played Jalan, which was her consort, who was a vampire in disguise, he basically, anybody who was alone, he singled them out and charmed them. He mesmerized them as soon as he could. And so he had, I think, everybody but two. I think he had 4 people mesmerized by the end of the scenario. And the 2 that weren't mesmerized were the ones fighting Svetlana, the Madam, because they thought she was the problem. Of course, she had her own winning condition, which was she's actually a night hag who needed to sacrifice 11 hit dice worth of characters on a dark altar by the end of the night. I think she got 1 character.
So one of the important parts of a Braunstein is that and I'm talking about a single person Braunstein, not a big battle Braunstein. The important parts of a single person Braunstein is that every person has their own individual victory condition.
Oh, I think in the original Braunstein, the idea was that there were 2 main sides, but each side had sub-factions that they may have had their own individual win conditions. So I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but it's important for everybody to have an idea of a win condition. Whether it's be self-imposed or presented by the scenario itself. Like, for example, my character did not have very well defined win conditions. It was a general idea. This guy is a military commander, and he's been put in charge of this barbarian city, which he's not very experienced at, but he had his last job taken away from him. The warlord, Kyle O'Connor, took away his job, gave it to another character, and gave him the job of keeping peace in the town. Well, it's a barbarian town. They don't really have much law and order. So the law and order is me running around with my army trying to keep it all from blowing up, right? So that's I didn't have an explicit goal other than, I guess, find out who burned down the Shucked Oyster. But it was clear from the start that I didn't care about that, right? I just care about sort of keeping the peace in the town and possibly keeping my job. You know what I mean?
Does a Braunstein play better when everyone is given explicit win conditions?
I don't. I'm going to tentatively say it doesn't matter. We've seen really strict games go very well, such as the old Orktober, Rise of the Orc Lords that Mr. Wargaming did. I think it's more important that the players have knowledge and goals that work at cross purposes. So not necessarily a win condition, but player A knows that player B has this dark secret or something like that. Something for characters to have something to talk about, to have leverage over each other with, and to generate that sort of conflict. Think of more like a soap opera than a war game. But if you played it as a war game, where everybody has these X resources, XYZ, and the goal is to capture the flag on the hill, right? Then of course that would work too. That's just a more explicit sort of structure. I think what I think we're getting at is two things, and I want to bring in Fluid here, and I should have opened that page, but I didn't. Two things, which is the battle Braunsteins need to be asymmetric. Okay, a war game where everybody has the same army can be really good and really interesting. But the point of the battle Braunstein is asymmetry. People have wildly different knowledge bases. They've got different goals. They've got different abilities, right? And then you put them in this mix where, you know, and that's where you get your fog of war. Not everybody knows what everybody else knows, and not everybody else knows what everybody else is capable of, which was huge in the B-Dubs game, because it hadn't even occurred to me that one of the antagonists would be something as powerful as a vampire, right? Because I was just a level 7 fighter with like 240 soldiers, right? My character's capability was really well defined, and limited in its ways. And of course, a vampire's can't really fight with an army, but he was so much more powerful. I hadn't even considered that level of power as an antagonist, right? But as soon as you have those conditions where there's a shared scenario or a shared setting and asymmetric knowledge and abilities and, yes, goals, that's what's going to generate what you're looking for, which is what we talked before, which is that convergence, right? And Fluid the Druid did a really good blog post about this, and I'm going to find it, which is fluiddruid.blog, and I'll put that link up on the screen there. Fluiddruid.blog. And what he wrote about Braunsteins is he compares them to a combustion engine. The diffusion of all the different elements in the game as the players bounce around the chamber or the room or the house or the Discord server, and they're talking with other players and making plans and, spreading rumors, lying, sharing secrets, whatever. And then all of a sudden, as they bounce around, all of a sudden there's a convergence. Everything gets compressed, and boom, there's an explosion. There's a fight, or some other kind of conflict, or something, or someone betrays another person, and everything changes. And so that status quo that was at the start of the game is forcibly changed by that convergence, or that explosion. And I think it's a brilliant model. I can put this up on screen right here. And I think we got a good example of it in his Braunstein. And this is fluiddruid.blog. It's called the Heat Engine Model for Role-Playing Games. I'm going to read this whole thing on air for you. This is the best theory I've read on that type of game, the Braunstein game, and why it works. It's that engine model that the little particles are moving around in the chamber, and then eventually they get compressed by their own actions, and then boom, there's an explosion.
So the referee doesn't have to do it; they just come together automatically.
Yeah, and what we've seen, what the ref does in those cases is when the ref either needs to be there to adjudicate an explosion or a convergence, especially if there's a battle, armies come into play, that sort of thing, or characters are fighting each other, you usually want a ref for those situations. Another thing, which is Jeffro always does this. Jeffro's always looking for the potential convergences, and when you spot one, that's when it's time to sort of halt the game or bring everybody into the same room and say, okay, this thing is happening now, right? That's how we did the Who Caresville Battle Braunstein, where we had been playing for 4 hours, and there was obviously going to be one event, the Red Kegger. The one event was going to be where the most interesting thing happened. So we all just sort of stopped and resolved that, right? So those are two ways in which the ref can facilitate that play. And of course, in a lot of games with official rule sets and official actions, the ref is the guy that you go to say, hey, I'm taking this action, I'm moving my troops over here, or I'm casting this spell over there, or something like that, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So go check out his blog. He's also got reports from the Gangbusters game. Fluid finally ran his Gangbusters game, and he did it in the same style because once he wrote that article on the engine model for Braunsteins, he realized that was the missing piece to make Gangbusters work. Have you ever looked at the Gangbusters game?
I saw some posts on it, but I haven't read it, no.
So it's an old TSR game, and it's basically a role-playing game for you playing cops and robbers as a kid. I'm not joking. It's set in 1920s, 1930s, Prohibition era United States. You can play a copper, you can play a gangster, you can play a bootlegger, newspaperman, FBI, prohibition agent, whatever. Wildly different characters with wildly different goals, and it even says you don't need a ref to just play, right? You get a bunch of players together, like the rules are there on how to do a fist fight, right? The rules are there on how to do a shootout or a car chase or whatever. It's got just the rules that you need to run that sort of cops and robbers game, only it's also like a role-playing game with you have characters with different abilities, and the dice are used to determine the outcome of those sorts of conflicts. But how do you make that kind of game work? Not like you can't do it a weekly game like a D&D game, can you? This is where the Braunstein rules really make it shine. So Fluid had a bunch of us, once again, jumping on Discord, using voice chat to play some Gangbusters. And much like other Braunsteins, the scenario was sort of set up ahead of time. He had, I think, 8 total factions to play, and I think 6 of us were playing. So most of the factions got used. There were 3 gang factions, police, FBI, newspaper. There was another newspaper that didn't get played. Oh, there's another gang faction. And I think that was it. And Gangbusters, the game, has really interesting rules on how to play weekly and by day. And this isn't like Dungeons and Dragons where you get together with your friends and you decide what you're going to do together and go raid the dungeon or something like that. So the ref took those rules and made a Braunstein out of it, where the rules are you generally plan what you're going to do for the week, what you're going to do day by day, and the players, or along with the ref, figure out if any conflict happens. Right, the cops are going to be staking out your hideout for, maybe they're going to try to or maybe they're going to make a raid on your speakeasy, try to catch you with some illicit goods, or the FBI agent is interviewing some of your associates to try to figure out what happened with a recent crime. Or if you're playing a gangster, you might plot a bank robbery, or you might be raiding another gang's uh, loot, or whatever you can think of. And of course, the newspaper guys always got to try to get a scoop and scoop the other journalists in the area, right? And so all you need is just people say what they're going to do for the day or for the week, and if anything come into conflict, boom, you've got the rules. Oh yeah, well, uh, it turns out that during the time of this bank robbery, you had these police characters over here in this neighborhood. They respond, so now you two players are actually in a conflict, right? So I'm sure you can see how this goes to a Braunstein writ large. We were all given special characters with a list of secrets and goals and knowledges about the area. Uh, I was given Leo O'Banion, the Irish mobster, who actually owned most of the bootlegging operation, and he had the mayor of the city and the chief of police in his pocket. Um, and I was in conflict with Johnny Casper, the Italian mobster, and I think we had Macho Mandolf playing remotely. He was playing Al Capone in his gang. And the chief of police was actually one of the other players. So our meetings were mostly cordial, unlike the rest of the game. Another player played Special Agent Elliot Ness, of course, and Dunder Moose showed up with the newspaper, and he really made everything fun because his task was to sort of spread the news that he learned about everybody's actions every day. And so we played a series of days where we gave Fluid our orders for the week, our prospective orders for the week, and then he'd just go through them day by day to see if any convergences happened. And every day, something crazy happened, and we would get one of the other players, Dundermoose, would actually give us and he was live tweeting this at the same time. He would tell us, extra, read all about it, and so he'd tell us the events of the day. And so you'd hear about this thing that you told the ref about, and you're like, oh yeah, cool, that was me, right? But for the rest of it, you wonder, where else, where the other news came from. So it was this really cool dynamic of, so the players had free time to talk every day because, telephones, right? So we could talk with each other more or less all we wanted, and we're like wheeling and dealing and making deals and trying to figure out like what the factions are going to be. And how can I get the police to help me without actually giving them too much information and implicating myself, that sort of thing. And so we're communicating with the ref, and the ref is trying to figure out whether anybody's going to come into conflict throughout the days. And at the same time, we're also communicating with another player whose job is to spread information or misinformation amongst the other players, and B, he's gonna influence the public opinion of the factions in the game. And the one goal that everybody was sort of had coming up was that there was a special election coming up in like 2 weeks, and so all of the players were sort of angling themselves to basically have the most power, or if you're especially the criminal factions, we wanted to have the most power or influence, or in my case, maintain my influence. I was the vulnerable one in this scenario. And so we all had to manage our influences with the people of the city. We had to manage our influences with the other players, and we had to take actions that actually helped us win. It took a long time to run day by day. I think breaking it down to the nitty gritty of like, okay, and I'm going to do what happens on Monday and do what happens on Tuesday. I think that really wore the ref down, and it certainly took a long time. I don't think we finished a full week, but crazy stuff was happening every day. The law enforcement officers were investigating missing persons. Al Capone was, you know, threatening all the other gangsters, trying to get us to join him and pay tribute. Absolutely great playing. And finally, on the last day, I'd had enough and actually sent my best hitman to try to whack one of the other player characters, which, in hindsight, I probably should have done on the first day. But
Did it
sadly,
happen?
the other player survived, and at the same time, I on the same day I had rebuffed Al Capone's uh, offer, shall we say, of working together at the low price of me giving him 10% of all my revenues. Which I believe my response was, in the finest Irish brogue I could muster at the time, "You'll not take 10% of my foot up your arse." So fireworks happened. I don't think we got a clean resolution of 1 week, but we resolved a whole bunch of crazy stuff. This game is absolutely wild and probably perfect for this sort of wild free-for-all player versus player game. Just like before, just like the other game, Flu did an awesome job. The scenario he set up, he put a lot of work in ahead of time. Unlike V-Dubs, he put in a ton of work and gave us all a lot of meat to sort of dig our teeth into and be able to, wheel and deal and threaten and cajole the other players. The scenario was inherently interesting with city politics and influence and power and money all coming into play. Not to mention standard, pulpy stuff like romance and betrayal, and there's even a Romeo and Juliet side story with two side characters. They had eloped, but the factions thought that they had gone missing. Really, really cool stuff. Go check out his blog for the details. I may write some responses. You can find my stuff at doranal.blogspot.com. But after giving these reports, I might just keep it verbal. That's all I have to say. I had a great time. Awesome players, really good ref. Both games were outstanding. It's not the type of game I'm used to. I've always avoided the diplomacy style games. I never really liked doing LARPs. They never made sense to me. Coming up with your own goals and just sort of, often I find myself sitting around going, hey, what do I do? Right? But it's a skill like anything else, and these games are really fun. So when are you going to run one? It's okay.
Like there's 7 different reasons that's just all collided in my brain.
Hey, I am going to run one. I want you to know this is the official Geek Gab announcement. I am doing a Braunstein. It'll be the Dorenstein, and we are going to play Cyberpunk. I think we're going to play Cyberpunk 2020. That's not traditionally a game. That's not a game traditionally you think of as that sort of social game. But we're going to do it. Details forthcoming as to when we're going to do it. But if you're interested, shoot me a line on Twitter at DoranelGG.
And I want to say this without getting combative about this whole thing. There have been a lot of people out there who are, angry at the BroSR for running Braunsteins or picking up Braunsteins and running with it. They say that the only real Braunsteins in the world are those literally run by David Wesley himself at conventions. And Braunsteins were first came up with, literally 50 years ago. They're older than I am. And you've been running them for 50 years, but there isn't a rule book. There isn't a series of articles discussing them or analyzing them. There isn't a body of work about them. At some point, when a bunch of people take descriptions of what you've been doing with a game and revitalize the art form and begin doing it on their own and replicating the results and understanding them and analyzing them and experimenting with it and expanding upon it, it has moved beyond the creator. You no longer have ownership of it anymore. Like people took the original war games and made new war games, and then people took those war games and made new war games. And like David Wesley took those war games and made Braunstein from it, and like Arneson and Gygax took Braunstein and made Blackmore and Dungeons and Dragons from it. People have taken Braunstein in a new direction. And the new Braunsteins are just as valid as the ones being run at conventions are today. And I'm sorry, saying that the new Braunsteins being run by the OSR or being run by the BroSR are invalid is nonsense, because we have articles being published based on actual play that analyze the social dynamics of these games and help people understand them in a way that they haven't been understood. We have a large group of very, very intelligent people engaging in these on a regular basis, and the art form, the hobby, is growing and expanding, and people are becoming versed in these. And I do not doubt that there is at some point in the future a rule book coming that will say, hey, here's what a Braunstein is, here's how you run it, and here's how to manage the dynamics of it, here's what to look for, here's what a convergence is, here's how to manage them, here's how to use different rule sets of games for them, here's how to use different settings for them. I'm not saying that's going to be soon. I'm just saying I do not doubt that at some point that will be coming. These sorts of things are what happens. And if it had been done already, the BroSR wouldn't have needed to do it because it would have already been there. They could have picked up the rule book and said, cool, let's do this. But it hadn't been done already. So the BroSR are the ones who are doing it. And at a certain point, you have to say, well, events have overtaken you. And it's great that you're seeing what the BroSR has done and suddenly becoming excited yourselves and saying, but wait, but we want to own this, but we want to do this. Well, you had 50 years. And it's too late now. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean,
Yeah,
but you had 50 years.
you're right. It's too late.
Other people are doing it. Other people are doing phenomenally with it, and it was time for new blood. It was time for uh, young blood. I mean, most of the Broasar are people who are 10, 20 years younger than me, um, who are in there excited about it, spreading it, evangelizing it, uh, and it's great to see. So, yeah, don't let anyone take the validity of the Broasar Braunstein away from you, because you guys are the ones who are revolutionizing the hobby. You guys are the ones who, and I don't just mean in the sense of Braunsteins, I mean in the sense of overturning the assumptions of, uh, I think it was Bradford Walker who started calling it conventional play. Bradford, who's in the audience right now, overturning the assumptions of conventional play, um, which are assumptions that needed to be overturned, because there's a lot that can be done in role playing games that just hasn't been done. And I think that uh, I have a notion that has begun to percolate up from the bottom of my mind in the past several months, that even in games which are not Bronsteins, that are not PvP, uh, the setting of goals by players, player directed goals. The problem with modules, um, among other things, I'm not saying it's the only problem with modules, is that the goals are set by the writer of the module. The difficulty with moving people from module play to, and I want to use this term carefully because it's come to assume a lot of things. So with a, I don't want to use the term sandbox play, but an open play, right? A free play, um, is that players have to decide what to do for themselves. They have to set their own goals. And part of those goals are preset. And I've mentioned this before on the show and talking about game design, because what you have to do to advance your character automatically builds in certain goals. The game sets up for you specific goals you need to accomplish in order to advance your character. But players also have to select their own goals in open play gaming. And maybe I need to come up with a better term than open play gaming, but I think all of you know what I'm talking about. So in open play gaming, there has to be an understanding on on the part of the game master and on the part of the people who write the rule books to communicate these expectations to the game master and the players, that they need to set goals and work for those goals. Um, and I really think the notion of having, in modules, they provide the players direction. In open gaming, players need to provide their own direction. And so when moving people from conventional play to open play, you have to get them used to being self-directed and not just taking the direction from someone else. I think that's important. It seems to me. So,
Yeah, uh, absolutely. Well said. I think people tempted to speak up about exceptions or whatever, or the love of cooperative play or everything. This isn't a movement against cooperative play. It's a movement to include player versus player play. It's also a movement to include player initiative. It's fine to
yes.
be that. It's fine to be that guy who sometimes just wants to hang out with his friends, drink a beer, and throw some dice and smash monsters, right? And if you're that guy most weeks, all weeks, that's fine, right? But there's so much you can get out of your game by opening it up to player freedom and not just complete autonomy, but a game where everybody sort of wants to, shape the game and seek their own goals and really, really deeply interact with the fictional world as well as with the other players, right? It's deeper. It's if role-playing games are fundamentally more than a board game, taking this sort of open game and taking charge of what you want to do in the game with the other players and really interacting with them on that level is another level deeper.
So, I mean, really, we really do have to go. We're at.
You got 2 episodes for the price of one, everyone. Everybody who's hanging out with us live, thank you so much. Bradford Walker, I meant to plug you earlier. He's also running just sort of a play-by-post war game with big factions in his Dungeons and Dragons world. It's been a lot of fun. bradfordcwalker.substack.com. Go check that out. Everybody else listening, this was a lot of fun. Everybody listening later, I hope you enjoyed it. We talked about a few different things tonight, but it was great fun talking with you, Daddy Warpig. I'm saying goodnight for the week.
All right, folks. Again, we want to thank everyone who turned in live. We want to thank everyone who will turn in later and listen to us on all the other places we're available. This is Geek Gab. We're here every Monday night, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. Just do a search. We're at youtube.com/geekgab. Once again, that's youtube.com/geekgab. We're also available on the Google Play Store, on SoundCloud.com, and on the iTunes Store. Just do a search for Geek Gab. You can subscribe to us on the device of your choice, download us on your computer, listen to us on the web. We please feel free to subscribe. Click the little bell icon to get notices as to when we're going live, and also give us a like if you liked the show. We are signing out for today, folks, but don't you worry, don't you fret. We will be back.